Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Code Remix Weekly. With you is your regular host, my name is Tim Blake, and with me is Sam Song.
Pleasure to be here, Tim. How you doing?
I'm just fine, just fine. How are you?
Glad to hear it. I'm doing well. Have you been rock climbing or snowboarding recently?
I've been rock climbing last Friday and then mountain biking over the weekend. I tried to do
Nice.
like a good speed run on Sunday, where you could try to like make it in like an hour and a half doing the whole run. I managed, I
Right.
didn't fall, so
I've heard
that's a good weekend.
some mountain bikers tell me they like going up, and some that they tell me they like going down more. Are you an up-going mountain biker or a down-preferring mountain biker? Are they both good?
I, I'm in the Netherlands, so
Right. So wait, so
there's
that
none
then
of
that brings a
that.
bigger question: where are the mountains you're even biking on?
I live very close to Germany, so that makes it work. So there's some hills up to the border, and you can go
So
downhill
when you
for.
say
Like,
mountains, you don't just mean like a mound of dirt next to like a construction project?
there is a really nice bike part, which is a revised landfill. So that kind of works.
Yeah, yeah, okay. All right. Mountain biking, got it.
Yeah, but yeah,
I've also
no,
heard a lot of
Fred.
basically every mountain biker friend I've ever had has broken a collarbone at least once. How are your collarbones hanging in there?
I've not officially broken mine, but I have had like my shoulder injured for a couple of weeks while I was on holiday, unable to get see a doctor in between. So yeah,
Ouch.
you make it work.
I'm glad you hung in there.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers. So, any adventures on your end?
Oh, well, we went and saw a ballet for the first time in
Oh
years.
yeah,
Went and
yeah.
saw Swan Lake, performed by the Ukrainian National Ballet, who were in Seattle for like a one day only thing. And I wasn't familiar with the context of the ballet, so I'm trying my best to figure out what the story they're telling is. And it's one of wizards cursing people and turning them into swans and like true love breaking a curse. But it was kind of hard to piece all of that together through all of the flips and twists and jumping, lots of jumping, very good at jumping ballet dancers. But it was fun for sure.
Oh yeah, glad to hear you enjoyed it. So all good. So then let's take you through some of the updates that we have this week. And this is the exact moment that my mouse decided to stop working. So I'm gonna do it slightly awkwardly with a
Perfect
window.
time to show off how like a real programmer you can navigate everything with the keyboard.
Mostly, mostly. So we're gonna see. Because of course there's been some updates. We did a very short run through of updates last week. So but of course we did a full release last week. So that's now fully out, and there is a lot of new recipes in there. So that's something I'm really excited about. I'll show you that a bit more in just a minute. But this is all the release notes if you want to go through them. And a very excited feature that there has been quite some demand for, even though we ourselves are more sticking towards the LTS versions, but we now also support running on Java 4.24. And me and my team are already looking to use this to now write recipes for Java 24 and 25 coming up, as well as the new Spring Boot versions, all being able to use this community contribution to also support the Java 24 parser with the tools that we have. So very pleased to see that. And then, like I said, there's been a lot of recipes added. You can see that we currently support some 912 recipes from our friends at Picnic, who have, of course, defined a lot of refactor rules, where we recently doubled the amount of rules that we can cover. This has been in large part work done by a community member, Francisco, who's also going to join us at the Code Remix in Miami. So that's really cool. Where we can finally thank him for expanding the coverage that we have for the recipes here. Now, beyond that, there's also been some recipe development on the Spring side of things. Now, of course, some folks that know the show, they were already able to run these recipes as part of the recipe suites that we offer at Modern. But if you still need to upgrade to Spring Boot 3.4, and Spring Boot 5 is, of course, coming out end of next month, then there's now open source recipes to help you there as well. So these were added, they're not yet released, but they're going to go out with the next release next week. So know that this is coming up as well. And then, like Sam said last week, we added examples to the docs, and he wasn't sure yet at the time if we actually made that work and put it live. But I'm very pleased to see this work finally, where you can see that In this case, we have a role defined by the Foxit sonar, where they recommend not to use this pattern where a nullable string might be throwing a null pointer exception unless you flip around that equals. So this one example is on the docs, as well as a couple thousand others that we have, thankfully now, through this integration. So really pleased to have that. And then, as a final update from our side, is that we also put out a new blog to coincide with a new feature that I don't think we've announced here yet, which is the ability to build in batch changes that you do across your organization from external tools and make them show up in Modern to be able to bulk create pull requests, bulk approve pull requests, review pull requests, and see all of that live. So if you want to know exactly how that works, we have a full blog that you can read through to get that going. But this is a very exciting feature because, of course, there is a lot more tools out there than the tools that we have wrapped in recipes. And some use cases that they've gone over in the past week with potential customers is maybe run Spotless as an external tool in this way, or run your Gradle init if you want to move away from Maven to Gradle. This is a great way to get those changes into something you can mass manage through the platform that we have here at Modern. So that's it.
This batch changes features can run shell commands wrapped as recipes kind of thing?
So they're not wrapped as recipes, but you can pull those same changes into the platform to show the changes there. So this is just to give you a better grip on making changes at scale, even when those tools that you're running aren't recipes themselves. So really opening up the catalog to seeing the effects of managing the next step, because of course creating those diffs is very easy, but managing 100 or 1,000 pull requests, that is quite a challenge, and that we can now make easier for you with Modern. So yeah, this is very great. We might dive deeper into it on an upcoming episode, but for now, this is the updates I wanted to take you through.
Excellent. And that brings us to our that brings us to our guest, Venkat. Welcome, Venkat. Pleasure to have you. You have been in the industry for decades now, have a storied career, and are going to speak at the upcoming Code Remix Summit. Pleasure to have you on the program. Welcome.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Tim. It's exciting times. I'm looking forward to seeing you all in person in a couple of weeks in Miami.
Yeah, it'll be fun. We're gonna have I think a lot of great speakers, and you're one of them. You're all over the conference circuit. I don't know which of you goes to more conferences, you or Tim. Since Tim manages to go to a conference just about like you've had some weeks where you've had like 3 conferences in 1 week, Tim. Although that's a peak, not an average, right?
That's a peak very much. I looked through the list of talks that Venkat has given, and for any letter of the alphabet, he's given more talks than I have given in total. So.
Yeah, when I was a kid, they said I'm talkative. I'm like, okay, so let's do it.
Let's lean into it. Play to your strengths, man.
Absolutely.
So you can like put out a book of your talks at some point, like Venkat from A to Z kind of thing. Well, for someone with such a storied career, what are you interested in nowadays? What you've been around the block, you've seen a lot of what there is to see. What keeps you excited to be part of this industry and to get up in front of people and say, I've got something to tell you about these days?
I was telling this to somebody a couple of days ago. I would say 15 years ago, I felt like there's nothing new. It's boring. And suddenly, you look around and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much excitement. There's excitement in almost every corner you turn. So to me, the exciting things these days are, the development in languages, for example, Java, with versions of Java being released, the strengths in virtual threads is just absolutely mind-blowing in my opinion. And I've been talking quite a bit about data-oriented programming versus object-oriented programming, and I was in the Netherlands roughly about a month ago right now, and 2 organizations wanted me to speak about the same topic back to back. There, people just genuinely want to know about data-oriented programming versus object-oriented programming. So I've been talking about that. But off late, as everyone does, taking a more of a cautious approach into where AI comes in and how we can benefit from that. I would say I'm usually a cautious optimist, if you will. I'm usually optimistic, but I'm also very cautious in just throwing myself into things like, is this really going to help? So it's been a really good experience to dig in and see where it helps. So many areas, working with clients on various technologies. Test-driven development is an area that I spend a lot of time on, code quality. So helping them with that, but also to be able to now mix AI into some of those as well has been very exciting. So, I mean, I would say there's not a minute of boredom right now. It's exciting times and loving it absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah. So obviously, want to talk about the AI stuff, as that is a subject of your upcoming Code Remake Summit talk. But since I would also love to hear a little bit first, perhaps, about data-oriented programming. I'm a fan of programming languages in general and different programming paradigms. I always find it fun to think about how the same problem could be approached through a different paradigm, and how functional or logic or imperative change how one thinks about the problem. There's a truism, I think, not of programming necessarily, but of the human experience, that the tool changes the wielder. Right, that if you're used to swinging a hammer in a particular way, you build up a particular set of muscles on your arm. If you're used to programming in a certain way, you build up a certain set of cognitive pathways that prefer to operate in that mode. So tell me a little bit about data-oriented programming. I'd love to have a primer.
Yeah, so I take a more of a mundane approach in terms of deciding when, and to me OOP has served us really well. There's no doubt about it. And to me, the strength of OOP, obviously comes from polymorphism. So you have a abstraction you built, and then you want to override that particular method, and that works really well when you're able to build this hierarchy. And so my recommendation is, don't quit using OOP. This is
Of
not a
course,
pitch against one versus the other.
of course.
However, one of the places where it becomes very tricky, and I say this with a bit of a pain that I see in a lot of code, is you have a third party set of classes and hierarchy. So typically you're using a library of domain specific code. So you could be working in an enterprise where another team, if not another company, has developed this library of classes. And what you need to do is to use objects from those classes. Obviously, because you're a third party, so to say, even within a company, you don't have the ability to extend that hierarchy. So you're a user of this hierarchy. But what you typically need to do is take certain actions depending on which of those objects in the hierarchy that you are working with. So typically, if we want to use the OOP full-fledged, we end up creating this parallel hierarchy of classes. So you have, let's take a simplistic situation. You got a base class and two derived classes. Now you have corresponding base class and two derived classes on your side, which are going to manipulate the data and the details from that hierarchy. When we create something really complex, one way I think we cope with it is we give it a name of a pattern so we don't feel as bad about it. So you could call this a command pattern or a visitor pattern or a number of those things. But in all honesty, right, in the about 30 years I've been programming with design patterns, it's kind of shocking. Design Patterns book was released in 1994, and I grabbed it off the shelf as soon as it came out. And in the 30 plus years, while I've used a lot of design patterns, I never had such a desire to use either command pattern or a visitor pattern, mainly because I always felt like they were pretty heavyweight. And when everything is said and done, you kind of scratch your head because there's a lot of code that you have left behind. And no matter what pattern name I give to it, it doesn't help me sleep better in the night. It's like there's got to be something simpler. So to me, the data-oriented programming really addresses that. And here's where I think we need to get into terms with. I've seen developers. There's extremes are really bad. Developers who don't have any sense and knowledge of design principles don't benefit from it. But I've also seen the other extreme where developers write bad code because they get into their heads that they got to use some design principles. And I think both extremes are really really not good. And the key here is to recognize we need to have trade-offs that we willfully are balancing. And so to me, the trade-off here is, on one hand, we talk about extensibility and open close principle. Well, great ideas. And you can use polymorphism to make your code extensible. But at what cost is something we need to ask. When you build this parallel hierarchy, you're following open close principle, kudos, but you're violating dry principle to a certain extent. And you're also making the code overly complex. So this is where pattern matching syntax in Java really shines. And you're looking at the code, you can talk to a business analyst and discuss what the code is doing for all these different data in this hierarchy on your side of the application. So I think it's a nice trade-off where you're using pattern matching to process the data and take different actions for different objects in this hierarchy and mix that with records and sealed classes. You got this nice elegant pattern matching syntax that helps you to focus on processing the data. So you lose some but you gain some. And I think this is where, as developers, we must be willing to go through that compromise. And the point you made earlier is, I've done this way in the past. This is what I prefer doing, and I won't let go of that. Is going to be the hardest thing to do here, is to say, and what I've been telling developers is, actively prototype it, put them side by side, compare them, and let go of your emotions, right? Don't get attached to either one of those solutions, and see which one is more lightweight and easier to convey your idea. So that's kind of what is exciting me about data-oriented programming, is that it's a lot lightweight. It's not going to solve all your problems, but where it makes sense, I think it shines a lot better than using polymorphism and OOP in general.
That's interesting. I feel like I can already hear the distant voice of an OCaml or a Haskell enthusiast saying, "We've had pattern matching and destructuring for decades. You're just gussying up functional programming and slapping a new name on it."
And to a certain extent, I would argue that's what we do as an industry, right? We
It might
redo
be what
things.
we do as a species. Yeah.
We redo things every 10 years, give it a new name, and get excited about it.
Yeah.
And I
Everything
know,
old is new again.
yeah, and I'm all about excitement, because with every excitement, there's a new wave of developers
Energy,
coming
learning
in.
opportunity.
And we're pushing the boundaries and making things happen. That's not a bad idea. But I would even argue that I wouldn't call it entirely functional.
Uh-huh.
In that sense, I tend to have a very narrow view of functional programming than a lot of other people do, neither one being right or wrong. But I tend to really focus a bit more on, I would say, higher order functions, to lean towards functional programming and functional pipeline.
Yeah.
Whereas in this case, it's a hygienic syntax. It's a lot cleaner syntax, in my opinion. It's something that gives you clarity without clutter, and I'm a big fan of clarity without clutter as well. And from a puristic point of view, we may cringe on it and say, "Oh my gosh, this is a glorified if statement," and to a certain extent it is, but I think it brings that clarity and simplicity into it, and so I really like it. If that helps us to focus on it and communicate it by way of the name we provide, I think that's a really good thing. But I also have the opinion that languages constantly have to learn from each other, and the net benefit is the software development community, right? So what good are languages if it doesn't benefit the field. So I think languages should shamelessly share and learn from each other.
Oh, absolutely.
And one of the things I also appreciate of Java is, I often talk about it, the innovation of Java, in my opinion, is not finding new ideas, but in finding newer and better ways of implementing it. And that's
Hmm.
what really excites me about Java. Lambdas were there already. That's nothing new about it. But
Right.
Java gave that, invoke dynamic to avoid inner classes and implement it with a greater efficiency, with creating fewer garbage behind the scene. That to me is a nice touch. In a similar way, here docs have been around for a while in other languages, but Java with text blocks brought in, I like to call it as smart indentation. That's a name I give for
Yeah.
it.
Hmm.
Nicely put. I've struggled with here docs and other languages where I'm literally bleeding through my eyes because you got to match the syntax in a certain way, and if you don't, things go haywire. With that, Java again, not being the first language to bring in, brought in a better way of doing things. So I call it the Java touch. So Java doesn't innovate by introducing ideas that have not been explored, but I think Java brings the
Yeah.
as an innovation better ways of implementation within the language itself for
There's
greater good.
definitely something to be said for waiting for other people to cut themselves on the bleeding edge and be like, I like
Yeah.
that path best. I think a
And
kind of an example of what you're talking about is
Yeah.
before I was writing a lot of Kotlin before working here at Modern, where we do almost exclusively Java, and I really missed smart casts, which is just like if you have an if statement where you check the type of a variable within the block of that if statement, you refer to that variable, it's of the new type. If A is string, then within that block, you can just treat it as a string unless that variable isn't final, right? Because then some other thread could have changed it. And then smart casts don't work anymore. And Java saw that and was like, well, we'll do that, but with a slightly different syntax, right? Well, you just specify the name of a new variable that within the instance of check, if a instance of string b, and then b is a cast to string. And so even if a is changed later by some other thread, b is still there on that previous value. And I think that's better. That just covers an
yeah.
edge case that the other SmartCast doesn't. And yeah, there's something to be said for waiting for other people to prove what the best way to do it is, and then be like, we'll just take each of the best ways as we go. Thank you.
And
And
to a
it,
great extent, I would so two points on that. On the latter point, I would say that's one of the things I say about Kotlin as well. I call Kotlin as the cocktail of languages, because I can't tell you how many times I come across somebody who would tell me, "Oh, Kotlin is like Python, Kotlin is like C sharp, Kotlin is like JavaScript." I'm like, yeah, it's like all of those, because that's exactly what they did. They went kind of shopping and said,
We
"Ooh,
like this
that's good,
language
that's
feature
good."
and this feature and
Yeah,
this feature.
put them together. But also for Java, I would argue, um, Java doesn't have the luxury that a lot of other languages have. Um, Java is being used by over 10 million programmers. It runs on so many devices and organizations. They don't have the luxury of saying oops,
Yeah.
to do something and saying, yeah, never mind, we're going to deprecate that
yeah.
too quickly, we're not going to change it.
Right.
So the innovation has to be very cautious. In the case of
Stable.
Java,
Yeah.
its stability is extremely important for the amount of platforms on which it's supported. So I have a deepest respect for how much they've actually developed the language in spite of, in software development, we talk about this a lot, right? We talk about rigidity. Rigidity is where you are reluctant to change. And the reason you're rigid often is you are afraid of what you're going to break by way of changing things.
For
This is
sure.
the opposite of fragility. And the amount of use that Java has, uh, you would expect that it's got huge amount of rigidity on it, and it does to a certain extent. And then, in spite of that, the innovation they've been going through, It's just absolutely amazing. I've got the really good respect for the people who are moving Java forward. That's not an easy thing to do. We complain about legacy applications all the time. Java is one of the biggest legacies out there. 30 years into it. Can you walk into a company that has done 30 years of development on a software, and you tell them to make a change, and how hard it is, and the complaints we would hear. So sometimes tend to forget that how much of a legacy Java really is.
Yeah, you always
And
you don't backwards compatibility is one of those things that you don't notice until it's missing, and then you're like, oh God, I miss it so much. All of my stuff is broken now. Why would you do this to me? Cruel, uncaring gods of software. You're talking about reminds me just a little bit of in an earlier part of my career when I worked at Microsoft. My manager had previously been on the application compatibility team within the Windows organization, and they had been like, hey, we're the first consumer operating system. We want all of the devices that worked in the 90s and all the applications that worked in the 90s to still work in the 2000s. And he told me about some of the links they would go to create, shims to detect that a particular application was running. And if it was that application running, they would make the system call behave just like it used to in the 90s or maybe even the 80s, so that it would keep working just the way it expected to, even on modern Windows, even as those APIs had changed out from beneath it. So yeah, it could take a truly heroic level of effort and detail orientedness and precision in order to keep an ecosystem backwards compatible for so long. But it can be a great strength in the market to be like, well, if I go with this choice, they're not going to screw with me. And I do see that as one of the big benefits of Open Rewrite, or of being like a library that adopts Open Rewrite, of being like, hey, if you go with my library, it'll be easy to adopt our new version. We're gonna have a recipe for that. So like, maybe library A and B have similar feature parity, but we're gonna be easier for you to live with, easier for you to maintain, just by virtue of having that recipe support
Yeah.
out there. So yeah,
uh,
I I'm totally with you, and feeling all the guiltier about a breaking change that I committed recently. Anyway,
yeah, and
so
then
that's very interesting.
and
Oh, go ahead, Tim.
I was going to add what I really appreciate about Java is that measured evolving. So when, for instance, I've seen quite a few presentations on string templates, which for a while were targeted to land in Java. There was a preview release, and then it turned out not to work perfectly. And they think, well, it's the wrong direction to take, so we're going to just pause it and not add it in. Whereas other languages might try to grab market share by adding everything to it and then deprecating it 2 years later. But that measured evolvement, I think, is gonna give you longevity in the language. So
For
that's
sure,
really good.
for sure.
Yeah.
So that was really fun to talk about data-oriented programming and language paradigms and our favorite language features and all of that. But I believe your talk at the Code Remix Summit is all about identifying and fixing issues in code using AI-based tools. I'd love to hear a little bit about this. I've certainly observed, personally and amongst others, that AI can be very helpful for creating new code, but like having code is a problem in and of itself. Every line of code has a cost associated with it. Every line of code can contain bugs. And so writing more code faster can solve one problem and create other problems for you. So I'm very interested in learning about how to better maintain large code bases and how to not shoot myself in the foot with these tools.
It fascinates me about how we as humans have certain traits and capabilities, and it's a bit scary to see that you know even though we don't want to admit it, AI kind of resembles that in a certain way.
Sure.
And it's natural because AI was trained on the code we have written, so that's no surprise that it kind of mimics it. But I would say, at least talking about myself, I don't want to generalize this to everybody. um, I write bad code, but I'm really good in finding fault with other people's code. That's my superpower. So I often say, if you let me sit around and write some code, versus if you give me a code and ask me to critique it, I generally do a better job in critiquing code than writing code. And I kind of have a very similar opinion about AI. If you ask me as of today, I would say I am seriously not really that comfortable letting AI generate the code for me. I am not ready to put the code it creates into production. And the funny thing is, when I ask AI to generate code, 10% of the time it creates brilliant code. The other 90% of the time it creates rubbish, in my opinion. The funny part is, if I take the code it generates, feed it right back to it and say what's wrong with it, it tells me what's wrong in the code it just generated. This just like me, right? I would write the code, but you come back and say critique it, I'm going to critique it really well for you. So I think it's the area of
Writing and editing are not the same
the,
skill.
not at all. And I think most of us probably are better at editing than writing, I would say. There are certainly exceptions. I think there are some people who are absolutely great in writing,
Yeah.
but I think most of us, I can speak for myself, even if I don't want to generalize it. I think I'm better editor than and being able to write. So I find that AI is great for ideas rather than for solutions. And that's one of the recommendations I often give people these days is use AI for ideas, not for solutions. To me, ideas are extremely important because it gives me that vastness of things I want to consider in solving a problem. I don't want to jump into solving a problem right away and say, I want to solve this problem this particular way. I want to take in different options and consider, evaluate it. And AI is great for that. But rather than having to generate code, if I can ask it to give me ideas on approaches I can take, that's been very helpful. But two areas where I'm actually convinced that AI is ready for us. Is one thing related to the talk I'm giving, which is identifying issues in code. So when I take code which has problems, and we all deal with legacy code, one common thing I often hear from developers, almost in any organization I go to, is they immediately tell me, "Oh, Venkat, I joined the team after this code was written," or the guys who wrote this code have left, and I'm the victim who inherited this code, right? So if you're able to take this code and feed into AI, and for it to tell you all the potential issues in the code, I often do this exercise when I give this talk. Is I give examples of code to the audience, and I ask them to find problem in the code. It's a ticking time bomb in the code. That's what I call it. And 90% of the audience do not find the problem in the code. And then I execute it, and you see it fail, and they're surprised. It's like, whoa, we did not see this problem hidden in this code. And 100%, if I feed that code into AI, it nails the problem. I've not come across an AI that has not nailed the problem yet. And I think that's one area where I'm convinced that AI is really good today, is to identify problems, critiquing code, and finding issues in it. I may not agree with everything it says, but it gives me like 7 or 8 different problems in code. But the first two are already what is the major problem. So that's one area where I find it to be extremely helpful. The other area where I find it to be really useful, and I will clarify this a little bit more as we go along, is to generate automated unit test. I find it incredibly useful. I'm actually currently working with a client where the developers have 20 years of experience. They have written code which is enormously complex. This is not your average run of the mill web development code. I can tell you that. Um,
Not a simple CRUD application.
no, not at far from it. I can't say anything about it, unfortunately, about because of
Sure.
NDA. But I'm going to say this is not some code you can bring somebody off the street and have them modify the code. It's extremely complex from the domain point of view, from the problem it's solving point of view. And when I sat with the developers yesterday, their comment was, we don't think AI is going to help us here. And I'm like, okay, let's take a look at it tomorrow. So we spend the morning running that through AI to create automated tests. And their statement was, okay, this is scary. This is coming extremely close to what we can create with a lot of effort, but this is doing in minutes what we're probably going to take days to write. So it clearly shook the ideas in the experts' minds this morning, and that's kind of what I've been playing with a little bit further, and I'm convinced that there is power in this area. It's not perfect still. You need to still guide it, but my analysis at this point is, if you are a senior developer who knows what you're doing, the tool is going to increase your productivity enormously because it removes the manual labor from you, and you're able to focus on driving your ideas into code, into test very quickly. If you're a novice, on the other hand, this can be very dangerous because if you don't guide it, it creates pure garbage in terms of these test cases. And if you don't have the ability to discern between quality and not, that's going to be a really a problematic, code that generates as well. So if you're a, decent, above average developer, I think you can leverage these tools really well in these two areas. And I think that's where the strength right now is. This can change in the months to years ahead. But if you ask me today where I would use it, that's where I'm actually using it, not for code generation, but for detecting errors in code, finding major issues, and writing automated unit tests. That's where I find the value the most.
That's that's interesting. I've seen various products suggesting that they can use AI for code reviews. Have you tried those out and observed them to work well? Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
It's a lot more than code reviews. So a code review might prompt you to how you could redesign the code. That's kind of what I look for in a review, is catch potential problems in code, but how I could approach the design of the code as well. Along the way, maybe point some structural issues in code versus, uh, and that could be useful in that area. But I find that to be more effective if you provide more context to your own code. That seems to be more effective. What I find a bit annoying is when it doesn't have the context of my code, I might actually start reviewing the reviews at this point, and that doesn't go really well because I'm in argument with AI, and I think that's never a good idea to argue with AI, leave alone humans in general. But where I find it to be more effective, though, is uh, not as much in review of the code, but in terms of analyzing it, documenting it, explaining. Okay, so here's an experiment I did a few weeks ago.
Uh-huh.
Um, you take a fairly complex code, throw the code at it, and ask it to describe what the code is doing.
Uh-huh.
It did a fairly decent job in describing what the code was doing. It was actually able to even identify certain problems in the code as well. But then what I decided was to strip the code of as much context as I can. So I, with vengeance, sat there and removed variable names that gave any clue of what the context was. I started naming variables as L1, L2, P1, P2 everywhere, modified the function names to foo and bar,
Uh-huh.
and made it completely unreadable, and then fed it to AI. And in all honesty, I can see AI beginning to struggle as well. um, it was still fairly good compared to humans' word. I gave the code completely, you know, removed of all the context and information, gave it to about 20 different programmers and said, what does this code do? And not a single one of them was able to identify what the code was doing. I struggled with it,
But
but
so
it
did
gave a
people.
but like people, but it gave a hint as to what it might be focused on, and that was pretty impressive. So where developers couldn't have a clue at all, it was like, this kind of looks like this domain or this kind of problem, and I was like, wow, with all that struggle you're still able to point me in that direction. I think that's pretty much that's pretty remarkable in my opinion to its capabilities.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, yeah, I think what you're saying about it, about like editing versus authorship, makes a lot of sense and resonates with me, and how I got a lot better at painting and illustration from watching a YouTuber who painted over other people's paintings. Like they'd send in a painting, like I got this as far as I could. It's not I'm not satisfied with it, but I don't know how to make it better. And he would take it and make it better. And I learned so much more from that than I did from watching masters paint, because they just did it right the first time. They didn't make any mistakes, so I never learned how to correct mistakes.
Mhm.
And so the process of watching, of discovering and correcting mistakes was incredibly instructive. And I hear some echoes of that in what you're talking about, both in terms of having the AI describe the code and in terms of having it generate tests for something insufficiently tested. And that's something that we get asked or challenged about a lot. Is if I go run this recipe and it makes a bunch of changes to my code, how do I know it's good? And I'll often be like, well, like it's not intended to change the semantics or behavior of the code, so all of your tests and such should still pass. And they're like, what tests? I mean, sometimes they're like, what tests? Some people are like, yeah, okay, fair enough. And some people are like, we don't have the test that we want to have. So this is definitely an area of interest for me, of how do you generate good tests for code so that you can then transform it and try to evolve it with confidence, whether you're evolving it with automation or just through further manual effort. So yeah, we'll definitely have to try that. What are your preferred tools for having AI or for generating tests?
Yeah, mostly the because I'm within an editor, oftentimes using Copilot seems to be a really easy way to get to that. But the key is not using Copilot alone,
Mm-hmm.
but to really experiment with different models, LLMs in there. And there's a wide variety of change that it goes through depending on the model you pick. So I would say, continue flipping between multiple models and see which one seems to give a better response. What I can definitely tell you is, again, I've been teaching courses related to this for a larger group, and one of the advantages of a larger group is I would take like 6 problems and I would ask the team to solve each one of these 6 problems. And what's really funny is when they propose the solutions, I would ask them, what tool are you using in solving this problem? And on the first exercise, there'll be people who will really proud to say, oh, I used this tool and it gave the best answer. When we go to the next exercise, it'll be a complete flip. The teams that said they have a really good solution on their hand would admit they're using the same tools did not give them a really good solution. So it's extremely inconsistent, and so I would say try different models and try different variations of it. And try it at different times as well. Even within a same tool, it doesn't always give you the consistent response. So it's a mixed bag right now. But I would say, we've been driving this more from Copilot, mainly because it's easier to drive this from within either IntelliJ or Visual Studio Code, depending
Right,
on what my clients are using. That's what we've been trying through
right,
this interface.
right.
It's interesting to have a technology that is so far giving you that variable reward where it might work, it might not work, and then of course it is very addictive to have something of that nature. But it's
Yeah.
yeah, definitely good to experiment with because yeah, others are doing that as well, and yeah, you don't want to be the one using a chisel when everyone else has long since moved along.
Yeah. And I would say in a way I'm okay with not working consistently as well, because in general, that's true of us humans too. When's the last time we were consistently, delivering results at the same pace every day? That's how we kind of figure out what works and what doesn't work. And also I think it kind of brings back the fact that these are tools we need to drive. They're not to replace us. And I think it's naive to think that these will replace us. I don't think so. But instead it's for us to leverage these tools for us to be more productive. So I'm quite okay with the fact that it's not always consistent.
Yeah, it gives you something to interpret and to make a decision between. Certainly, if you get to a point where people aren't making a conscious decision or aren't aware of the alternatives, or I don't know, maybe you don't have a fully formed thought here, but I'm just thinking that if you're, blindly trusting what you're being told, whether it's an AI tool or another one of or another engineer on your team, um, I've always found the hardest things to debug are my own faulty assumptions, right? Where I'm like, okay, the problem is between here and here, and then I have to debug through that whole space to realize that the problem was back here, right? It was something I didn't know that I assumed the world worked one way and it worked another, and that only a methodical and scientific process could eventually lead me to question my own assumptions and figure out that that's where the blind spot truly was. And so, yeah, these tools that can give you more things to consider. Just like going to another human programmer and being like, "Well, what do you think about this?" could reveal that that I was making an assumption that I didn't even realize I was making. That having something to be like, "How does this work?" Or what does this do? Or what tests would be appropriate for this? Could prompt you to be like, "Oh, I don't understand this as quite as well as I thought I did." Variable names lie, comments lie. My own idea about what this code does is wrong in some ways. All models are wrong, but some models are useful, kind of thing. Yeah, so
Yeah,
that
well,
that
actually,
that resonates with me.
that's an interesting point for you as well, because one of the ways I solve problems, and I'm sure a lot of other people do as well, is what we call as the rubber ducking.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
stuck with the problem, and I would go to a colleague, start describing the problem, and then
yeah.
halfway through, you're like, "Wait, I solved the problem," and your colleague is like, "I'm glad I was able to help without doing anything," right?
Yeah.
And this is one thing I'm really appreciative of my wife, because she kind of figured this out, that I like to talk about problems, even though she's not technical, she's not going to help, but she'll pretend that she is interested in what I'm saying, and surprisingly, she has picked up enough of these terminologies over the past 3 decades we've been
To do a little
together.
pattern matching of like,
She
when you were
does.
complaining about this, you said this was the solution. Is that
And
applicable
uh,
here?
and so sometimes she would surprise me. I'm like, wait,
How did
how
you
did
know
you
that?
know that? Exactly.
And she's just like, I'm just repeating what you told me.
And I think that AI takes a very interesting role, because at 10 in the night you can't sleep, and you can't bring your partner to the table for this discussion.
Not if you want to keep having a partner anyway.
And or you can bring a colleague to the table,
Yeah,
or humans get tired, but
yeah,
AIs don't, and so you can keep querying it. So maybe that's a statement we need to make: is AI is a fantastic rubber duck, and that's really a great benefit, because you can
yeah.
bounce off your ideas, and try to figure out and untangle yourselves from your mental block. And I find that to be really useful as well, is to just have a conversation with AI. Speaking of which, I can't wait for the days when we move away from the need to prompt it. And I think the next real power is going to be more fluent conversational UI for AI. I think
It's like
that's where it's
have
going.
a clippy there while you're coding, being like, "It looks like you're
Absolutely.
writing a DTO. Would you like a transaction kind of thing?"
A camera to watch your face so it knows your emotion, screw privacy for a little bit, and and so there's this camera that watches your emotion. I'm not still ready to have wires running through my skin. I'm not there yet, and have you speak actually. If it can listen to you,
Uh-huh.
and you end up having a conversation, put on a headphone, and you're talking to it. I don't think we are far from those days, and
Sure.
I think that's when I think we're going to have a real productivity where it becomes an assistant much more effective than it is today. uh, I don't think we're far from that, and I hope to live long enough to try that, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, I could sometimes use one that was like, it looks like you've gotten distracted from the problem at hand because of, this it was hard and this and that YouTube video was much easier to click on. But what if you tried this other thing? Maybe that would help. Like, okay, okay, yeah, I should try that other thing.
Yeah, and to me, one of the things I've realized over time is when ideas are dime a dozen. You can have seven ideas, but how do you know even if this idea is going to work? So to me, one of the things I've trained myself to do over the years is if I find that an idea is worth considering, I prototype it because I've burnt my fingers a lot in the past when I jump on ideas and I'm like, ooh, look at this, it's going to be awesome, and then you're proven wrong. So prototype, to know if it is going to really work. And I think that's another area where I think AI is remarkable. Is while I don't trust it to write my code, I would definitely trust it to prototype my code. And so if it reduces the time between ideation and prototyping, I think that's a big win as well. So there's so many areas where I think it's going to benefit us a great deal, in terms of being more productive, and at the same time not put ourselves in a risky situation, if you will, in using the AI. I think these are the better stories of AI in my mind, at least.
Yeah, ones where you're not trying to, where you're having a cognitive aid, not a cognitive substitute.
Yep. Absolutely. It's augmenting our, what we do, rather than replacing what we are doing. That definitely is the goal.
Yeah, I've definitely at several times in my career come to a large, complex new code base and needed to like solve a bug or implement some first new feature. And I often found that like the architectural diagrams or other documentation that might have been on hand was at a really insufficient like level of detail and often out of date to some extent. And so the when all else failed, what I would find myself doing is just like stepping through the code and drawing like boxes of like this class calls this class with
Yep.
this data structure until I had created a map of sufficient detail that I could be like, okay, the data I need comes from here. It needs to be combined with this over here. Okay, now I finally understand what needs to change. And after I'd done that exercise a couple times, then I would have a mental map, a mental model of the code that was built up enough that I could be a little bit more fluent with future problem solving or future implementing. But that's a very laborious process to go through. And then when you're talking about, like, hey, these language models are very good at summarizing what code does or these kinds of things. So thinking back to those experiences and how something like that could have been really helpful to me then.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess
Totally.
next time I have a strange new code base, I'm definitely going to try that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. I guess we have only a few minutes left. Vinkat, are there any questions you wish we had asked, or any topics you wish we had broached during this time?
So one of the other talks I give, and it probably it's worth mentioning, at Code Remix, is I'm going to talk about, a little bit of an extension of the talk, but I'm going to talk about modernizing the Java code, and it's a two-part presentation in one. And at one hand, I use the modern tool to
Hmm.
show how you can really modernize your Java code from Java 8 all the way down to Java 21 or 24, and then the open rewrite basically to show that as a journey, and bring the code to a certain level as far as OpenWrite can take it, and then take that code and then jump into Copilot and then start modernizing even further. So that's a talk I'm also looking forward to give at Code Remix, is to give this idea of how do you use Open Rewrite plus AI tools to modernize your Java code, which I think is very valuable for a vast number of programmers
For
who
sure.
are using Java 7 or earlier versions that will not be named here, to more recent versions of Java, and how do you move forward. So that's one thing I'm also looking forward to
Yeah.
speak about in addition to the talk on AI. I'm looking forward to that as well.
Yeah, there will definitely be lots of related or adjacent content at the conference. I mean, one thing that we talk a lot about and experiment a lot with is making these large language models able to call out to open rewrite recipes and related tooling through like MCP and other and similar mechanisms, so as to augment the language model with the ability to use deterministic tools, right? It's been said before that AI is good at the things that computers are bad at and bad at the things computers are good at. And that this is kind of like giving your AI a computer so that when it needs to make some deterministic calculation or some deterministic, or is working in just a domain where a deterministic algorithm would be better than whatever it might hallucinate, well, it can just call that and then come back over to the AI side for, or the large language model side for the summarizing and the inferencing and the things that it is strong at. Yes, we'll have a lot of really interesting content kind of coming at this space from a whole bunch of different angles. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. Any final thoughts or questions, Tim?
So, to
Oh yeah,
what
go
you
ahead.
mentioned,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
to related to what you mentioned, I heard, and I'm not sure exactly how much of this is true, but Copilot was actually uh, calling into Open Rewrite as well, but I'm not sure if that project really went any further. But that's something, to your point. There, I've seen a few initiatives, but not exactly sure what the status of that is.
Well, we'll definitely have some stuff to show off on the subject for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So anything else, Tim, or is this a good place to call it?
No, I think this should be good.
All
So of
right,
course,
great.
like if folks wanna join us, then we have some tickets available still. Then because yeah, all three of us are gonna be in Miami in 2 weeks. I just spoke to someone today who bought his flights to Florida just to be able to join us there. So we hope to see all of you there. And,
Yeah,
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 it
we've
should
had
be
a
interesting.
definitely a surge in signups over the past few weeks, which is very exciting to see. It's always a bit of a leap of faith putting on a conference, particularly like our first conference as a company. It's like, is anyone going to show up? But it seems like people will, which is great. All
So yeah,
right, thanks so much for joining us, Venkat. Look forward to seeing you in person in a few short weeks, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you again.
yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Join us in Miami for Code Remix Summit. Attend hands-on sessions with some of the best industry experts. Looking for immediate ROI by attending? Bring a relevant business case and work directly on solutions affecting your organization in the hack track. Bring your problem, bring your laptop, and walk away with work done for your boss. Register today for Code Remix Summit.